things, and really what I just want to do is accomplish, talking about by right and site plan development and the applicable parking standards that are used for those two very different types of development. And then also to talk about the site plan process and a little bit on the site plan history in Arlington, just kind of showing, how we've gotten here. If I drift in and out, just kind of motion one way or the other. So, yep. Pretty quickly, easy here is by right development. I hope I don't bore you, but just really by right development, and if we're talking about it from the office perspective, it is office development that is permitted. It's through administrative approvals of engineering and building plans. There are no discretionary approvals. There are no public meetings with planning commissions, transportation commission commissions, things of that nature. It truly is developing within the parameters set forth in that applicable zoning district. So there are no permissible waivers or modifications of things such as additional bonus density or height or parking modifications. You have to build in accordance with what that specific zoning district permits. And as we kind of touched on just a few minutes ago, there's very limited application of this recently. Office development by right doesn't really occur anymore because of the incentives provided by the site plan process. There are still some by right office buildings existing today, very few. And you certainly won't be seeing any new by right office buildings anytime soon, I don't believe. But in talking about by right office projects, what you are talking about, once again, you have to meet what the applicable ordinance provisions are. And in this case, we are looking at, from a by right office perspective, what we've talked about. The parking requirement is 1 space per 250 square feet on the first floor. The basement and the second and through the 5th floor is 1 space per 300 square feet. Then above the 5th floor, it's 1 space per 400 square feet. So it's not a blended ratio. It really is based upon the size of the building. So that goes into account as well. But like I said, very limited application of this existing. On the flip side, what you have is the site plan development process. And what this is it is a special exception form of development that permits site plan development by way of the special exception process, which does permit, from an office development perspective, additional height and density. And those are permitted in each one of the zoning districts that allows office development, where you can achieve a greater amount of density or height than what is permitted in the by right perspective. So we are really looking at going from the maximum base to a higher amount, and we're really looking at density and height as really being that incentive to move forward. And in this case, it does require discretionary approval. So it does require meetings with various citizen commissions and committees, and ultimately approval by the county board. But really, not only can you get additional density and height, you can also modify certain parameters of the zoning ordinance. Things such as parking is a permissible modification. And in this case, we're always talking about mitigating any impacts through development conditions, which is something we're going to come back to. But looking at office parking requirements from a site plan perspective, what I did was just put up here, and I think most people have seen this before, really just looking at the zoning districts that permit site plan office development and what the applicable parking requirements are before you start talking about any modifications. So for example, if you have a piece of property at zone CO 1.5, you choose to go through a site plan process, you would need to meet the parking requirements per section 33, which are really the by right office provisions. It's that 1 per 250 on the first floor and so on and so forth. Or as approved with a site plan, meaning that the modifications are allowable with certain mitigation. So the modifications that we look at are a parking ratio higher than 1 per 580, sometimes a higher compact parking ratio, sometimes the inclusion of tandem parking spaces. There are a number of types of modifications that we can talk about later if anybody has any specific questions in terms of site plan provisions that we've looked at. But basically, this is kind of the starting point with a site plan application, is in terms of meeting what the ordinance requires before we move past it, but only in the event that the developer or the applicant request such modifications. But I think the important thing just to look at here is what Susan mentioned earlier. It's these two districts. It's the CO Roslyn and the CO Crystal City zoning districts that really have gone beyond that 1 per 580 and really looking at a much higher ratio, which really is related to developing within these two very emerging urban areas of the county. I think we kind of touched on this already, but really in most of these cases where we're looking at the, and I just want to go back so people can see this, every time it's saying per section 33, what a lot of times we're looking at, and you'll see, is we're looking at a standard. And I think the standard has been touched on by what Susan mentioned. Looking at the 1 space per 580 is oftentimes used as a site plan standard in terms of what the parking requirement is when we're looking at these site plan projects that really don't have a defined parking requirement, such as in the CO like in the CO Roslyn districts where it's 1 per 1,000. If it says, per section 33 or as approved by site plan, we're really looking at usually that 1 per 580 as kind of the standard. And I know that in this larger format table, you can kind of see what that standard was, what they've requested. And I think Peter's right. For some of these older projects prior to 2005, you're going to see a lot of projects coming in around that 1 per 580, and then that shift kind of occurs where we started to move past it, which was really only allowed by way of these modifications with site plan projects. So really kind of just to go briefly through, I was asked just to talk about the life cycle of a site plan, what is kind of the process. It is a lengthy process, and so really in order to engage in the site plan process, it really is those series of incentives that get people to take part in that rather than go by way of by right development. Remember, additional height, additional density, these are all things that help move people into this other type of development. So it is a lengthy process, it is an expensive process. It does start with a concept, it goes through a preliminary review, it goes through a final site plan review, which does require the county board's approval, and then ultimately go through kind of another more administrative level of review in this post-site plan approval stage. That's even before you can really start construction. Like I said, we do just have a preliminary process, and I will just let you know I kind of just did some boxes just to show you how we get there. Just getting the site plan approved, there is a series of check-ins, review, going back and forth. Alone, this process does take, I know we have some developers here, everybody probably wishes they got it accepted the day they submit it. Doesn't typically happen. Really typically looking around 3 months or so just to get it accepted. And that means getting it from the process of submission to meeting the submission standards. They don't always get it right the first time, so we go through this check-in process. So kind of then now just to get back to this life cycle, what we have is really going in, the application gets filed, okay, we review it, it gets accepted, and then we start that review process. And this is when really we go out, we have meetings with various committees. We meet with the Planning Commission, Site Plan Review Committee, we go to neighborhood civic associations, has to be reviewed by the Transportation Commission, the Planning Commission. In some cases you go to other commissions, Housing Commission, Historic Affairs and Landmark Review Board. So it is a public process. And just going through all this, you can see we ultimately do get to a public hearing process. Site plans do require approval by the county board. Typically this process can take anywhere from 6 months to 3 years or more. We do have site plans that take a number of years to work through the process, but it is, because it is this iterative process, it does involve the community's review of certain things. Now whether they're looking at issues related to urban design, parking, any of these type of issues does require some review. So it really is a lengthy process. But I want to come back to really kind of when the project does go to the county board, really once again what we're talking about is, yes, the site plan process does allow additional height and density, but that does cause an impact. And so the purpose of site plan development conditions is really to mitigate the impact that that building may have on the neighborhood. So really, if you look at any of our site plan projects that go to the board, you are looking at approximately 80 site plan conditions that do go with those. And those conditions, really, once again, the purpose is to mitigate the impact. The topic really could be anything related to the development. Now, there does need to be a nexus between the condition and what the impact it is trying to mitigate. From a timing perspective, these are created by staff and they're reviewed or negotiated with the applicant. These are talked about in our public review meetings, site plan review committee, transportation commission, planning commission, so on and so forth. But they do go to the board in a draft form because ultimately the board does need to approve these conditions along with the site plan. So this process also takes some time because really this is important. This is really talking about how that building will exist within that community. So if there do need to be things to mitigate, for example, if the developer requests a modification of the parking ratio, and they want to modify that from, say, one space per 580 square feet to one space per 750 square feet, there are going to be a series of mitigating factors, and typically it's our TDM process, and so it's where these conditions would really explain how those issues are mitigated, or those potential impacts are mitigated. So really, just in summary, just to kind of close the loop on that site plan process, really, each one we're looking at it, each project for its conformance with our adopted, ordinances and policies. What does the zoning ordinance say about it from the perspective of that specific district or setbacks, parking, open space, all of these issues. Conformance with the general land use plan, sector plan. Some of our more recent sector plans get very specific on these areas and also do discuss certain mitigating factors such as the provision of shared parking or public parking, things of these nature, or even trying to go to higher parking ratios as a way to address some of these development concerns. But every project is different, and I think that it's important to recognize that. And so there is no boilerplate approach to looking at it. No two projects are the same. And that's why you do see this very lengthy process, anywhere from 6 years to 3, or 6 months to 3+ years. Hope we don't have these 6 years like that. That would scare me. But really, we're looking at all of these issues, related to urban design, environmental sustainability, affordable housing, transportation infrastructure, economic development. All of these issues are reviewed because each of these projects addresses all of these categories, so they have to be looked at. Once again, we're reviewing those with the community, and those are subject to discretionary approval. And I put this bullet up here, it says conditions are not static. What you'll see is we do have a set of standard site plan conditions. And those really are kind of the baseline, and those are, I believe right now, the standard set is around 75 conditions or so. Don't be surprised if you go look at a staff report for a recent site plan and you see about 90 to 100 conditions, because once again, that development may have some specific issues related to it that cause new conditions to be created to mitigate those impacts. So we're constantly looking at revisions to those conditions or to that standard set. So really just looking at, evolving that standard set just to be reflective of the development practices and procedures that are going on. But once the conditions are approved by the county board, they're enforceable in perpetuity unless a change is requested. But you'll see the standard set of site plan conditions are changing to address new things. New TDM measures that are available that weren't looked at 2 years ago, things of that nature. So, but really the ultimate goal is to achieve a project that really does provide a benefit to both the community and the applicant. And you're really just looking at this site plan process as a way to leverage previous county investments, getting the developers to capitalize on that without future public investment, and really getting the transportation infrastructure that has been invested in the past to really mesh with the new development that can take advantage of that. And so really just kind of want to step through and say, well, kind of what's been going on in the last 30+ years or so. And really, once again, the site plan process really does look at leveraging that previous public commitment in this infrastructure, mainly talking about Metro. And so what we're talking about is looking at the Metro corridor. You can really, I know Susan passed around some photos of some of the specific station areas, and here kind of step out and take a longer view of looking at the corridor, and just looking at what has kind of happened. And what you're going to see, we'll just go through a couple of these, just show you from 1979 to 2009, and just really the evolution of the corridor. and focusing on these metro stations, because what's been happening since that time? A lot of site plan development. A lot of things are changing. So now, I wish we could see a little bit closer. You can see those in the pictures Susan passed around. What you're going to see very easily from 1979 to 2009, a lot of surface parking lots, a lot of above-grade parking structures between those years to where we are today, to where the landscape is really changing.
Could you just sit while you go
Oh,
to those
absolutely.
pictures?
No, I'm not blocking anyone's view. So really pretty easy here. Just we called out these metro stations, Ballston, Virginia Square, and Clarendon. Just looking at it, 1979, first year of metro service. Move forward to 2009. So you can really see the, especially in Ballston, a very transit-rich neighborhood, really the evolution of a very strong office market. You have some very well-designed mixed-use development projects, but really you're seeing this development that's growing up around this, investment in the transit infrastructure here, and just seeing how the development is really, capitalizing on that. Site plan process, majority of the buildings in this photo were subject to site plan approval. Here, kind of just going from Virginia Square to Clarendon, once again, a lot of low-rise, single-family residential development, and then right around the metro stations, a lot of underdeveloped land, a lot of some aging commercial buildings. Moving forward, just once again looking at this area, growing up around that, still a lot of site plan projects here. And then we can jump forward to Courthouse and Roslyn. And even in 1979, Roslyn had already been growing up, as Susan talked about. Really, you're looking in the 60s as the evolution of this area, looking at it transitioning from what it was before, a lot of some industrial uses that were really capitalizing on its proximity to DC. But then, now we're really starting to see it grow around not only its proximity to DC, but really just seeing how these other metro station areas can grow as well. A lot of, once again, through the site plan process and things that are occurring here. So really, then just to kind of come and look at the numbers, because these are impressive. It's pretty strong. What you're seeing is this shift. It's a massive amount of, or a seismic shift in the development here, and a lot of that is growing up once again around the advent of metro to this area, really looking at the growth of the office market, residential and retail. So a lot of these things, do play into what the development is like today. Very strong mixed-use areas, opportunities for shared parking and things that I know you guys will be talking about. But these are the type of things we look at with each of these site plan projects. And then I just kind of want to close and just show you a couple recent projects and see where we're kind of going with some of these issues. The previous generation, and a few of us were kind of talking about this today, site plan projects were redevelopment of underutilized by right development. So a lot of the CO development that was occurring was capitalizing on some of these underutilized industrial properties, so you're looking at rezoning them. What you're seeing now is a lot of redevelopment of site plan projects, and so you're seeing that second generation. So really what you have here is, and I'm going to show you these two examples, but we've already hit that next wave of redeveloping what was at the forefront of the development back in the 60s and 70s to where we're going. This is the Roslyn Gateway project on the left-hand side. It's probably a little easier to see in your slides, I'm not sure. But this is a site plan project that was approved by the county board last year. On the left, this is the existing Roslyn Gateway North building. What you can see here is it is approximately 150,000 square foot office building, but what's it doing? It's sitting on a podium, and that podium is an above-grade parking garage. And so that was, at the time, was probably very innovative. It was a great use of the land. Where this project moved, the site plan that was approved last year by the county board is on the right. This is the Roslyn Gateway project as is proposed, as approved, 3 buildings totaling approximately 1 million square feet of development, an office building, a hotel and residential building, and then a single-use residential building. What's really innovative about this, one of the great things that, like I said, we look at all of these various factors with site plans: urban design, environmental sustainability, transportation infrastructure. What was critical about this project was kind of seeing what was the condition of Roslyn as it developed in the past and what exists today, the above-grade parking. where is the development moving? It was really important to take that above grade parking, find a way to get it below grade. And for those of you who are involved in Roslyn, it's very difficult. You have a very shallow level of bedrock. It's not just how shallow that is, it's also the density of the bedrock makes it very difficult and costly from a construction standpoint. So this project, Roslyn Gateway, did involve a number of parking modifications associated with it. But what was really important was looking at how Roslyn is evolving as this urban environment, and as most know, it's undergoing a review of its sector plan. But you know, the urban environment is critical here. A lot of these above-grade parking structures, they really deactivate the street. So that's where the Roslyn Gateway project was really kind of important. I was really looking at ways to hide that parking and not just hide it behind building above grade, but find a way to get it below grade. And one of the ways to do that was through looking at some modifications that would be appropriate. And in this case, this involved mechanical stackers, tandem spaces, higher compact ratios, but also let's not forget that this site is 1 block from the Roslyn Metro Station. It's also very well served by bus routes. It is right in front of the Key Bridge. You have a very strong pedestrian network. So you had this very strong multimodal neighborhood, and that's what this site was really kind of capitalizing on. Another project that was recently approved is in Crystal City. Once again, on the left, this is the Crystal Mall 3 building, also one of the earlier site plans that was approved in the 60s. This was really, we all know what Crystal City, how it grew, and this was important. I mean, Crystal City capitalized on that GSA market and was really looking at dense office developments. You had some combination of above and below grade, as well as surface parking areas. With the approval of the adoption of the Crystal City sector plan, really the county was looking at how do we remake Crystal City as this new office market while really kind of moving forward with some of these transportation investments that have occurred in the past and which we know are coming, namely looking at the streetcars. So here on the left you have the Crystal Mall 3 building. You have a surface parking and loading area in front of the building. You have at-grade access points into the garage, and that plaza that's there, that's really a plaza on top of a parking structure. What the county board approved with the 1900 Crystal Drive project, you can see on the right-hand side, it's a 300-foot tall building. It's a mix of approximately 700,000 square feet of office space and about 10,000, 11,000 square feet of retail. Once again, getting rid of all of that surface parking area, putting it below grade, which was difficult because, for those who know about Crystal City, it's a series of interconnected parking garages, portions below grade, some are at grade. The underground is not really below grade, it's really at grade, but there's plaza activities on top of it. So it's really looking at how do you change this area, and there were some modifications that were approved with this, looking at tandem parking spaces, I think was the main one in terms of getting the parking ratio to what the CO Crystal City district required. So I just wanted to put these up there just to show you that you know, there is a by right development option, but from an office perspective really isn't occurring anymore, and it's because of the incentives that are allowed through the site plan process. And so we're already seeing opportunities to redevelop those former site plan projects because the parking requirements, you know, all of these things that may be impediments to moving forward, just there are such great incentives to revitalize these areas. And here are just two examples, recent examples of how that can be done. So I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions you may have about site plan processes here in the county.